California isn't really known for its active volcanoes, but we do have a few, and that's what this video is going to cover. This map shows a number of volcanic threats in California. The ones in red are considered very high threats, and then the other two colors are high or moderate. We're going to primarily focus on the ones in red. We're going to start by looking at these three, which are part of the Cascade Subduction Zone, and then we're going to look at the Long Valley Caldera. Let's start by thinking about volcanoes in North America. You can see here that there's a map showing Alaska, Hawaii, and the western US in detail. This is a location map. There are parts of North America that have experienced all kinds of melting, flux melting, decompression melting, and increase in temperature from mantle plume melting. So let's take a look at these and remind ourselves what's going on. First of all, we have convergent plate boundaries. We have in Alaska a subduction zone that's producing an arc of volcanoes along the Aleutian Islands. Now the red triangles here are active volcanoes, and you can see there's some in other pictures as well. There's also an orange square that shows areas of potential volcanic activity. The black dots are population centers, and this dark green dot really pretty much looks like the black one to me, so I'm not going to worry about it. Where else do we have convergence going on? Well, closer to home, where the Juan de Fuca plate is going beneath North America. You can see all of the red triangles, the active volcanoes of the Cascade Subduction Zone, and we'll be looking at these three in Northern California. There's another tectonic scenario going on in the area, and that's intra-plate rifting. That's rifting within a plate. And that is going on in Eastern California, which is going to play a role in the Long Valley Caldera story, and also in Arizona and New Mexico. Now, I haven't really talked too much about rifting before, except to give an example in the East African Rift Zone. But when continents start to rift, when they're just at the beginning stages and they're moving apart like these arrows show, magma does indeed work its way up. And that magma is going to be there because of decompression melting. Now, this is also showing how if you continue a rift zone, you might get an ocean basin and then a mature ocean. But right now, we're just focusing on this. Where have we talked about this before? Well, we talked about it when we talked about plate tectonics and the basin and range extension. This is showing snapshots from 10 million years ago, 5 million years ago, and the present of the Pacific North American plate boundary, which, if you recall, is quite complicated. As you can see in this picture from today, there's a very large region, it's in orange, where the crust has extended in an east-west direction. Pay attention to this sort of heart-shaped region right here. And I'm going to show that to you on the next figure with a little more information on the topography. So that heart-shaped figure is this red outline right here. And the red outline is showing the entire basin and range province. And you can see it goes into Arizona and New Mexico. It's in the Mojave Desert, and significantly, the western edge is along the base of the Sierra Nevada mountains. And Long Valley Caldera is right around there. So the story of extension is the reason why we have magma occurring in these areas in the form of volcanoes. Remember that this is formed by a series of normal faults. That's why we have ranges and basins trending roughly perpendicular to these arrows. These arrows are the direction of stretching, and then this is the result. Now in this diagram, it's called a Horst and Graben instead of a basin and range. Those are German words, and we often call this the Horst and Graben province. That's where our other California active volcano is going to be. Just to complete the picture here, we have an oceanic hotspot in Hawaii and a continental hotspot in Yellowstone. We're going to start in Northern California, and remember that this area up here is where the Juan de Fuca plate is going beneath North America. Here's a blow up of that tectonic zone. We have the Juan de Fuca ridge, and ridge segments are separated by large transforms with the Pacific plate on the left, the Juan de Fuca plate on the right, and then further to the right, past the subduction zone, we have the North American plate. This is what it might look like in cross-section if we could take a slice through the earth here. We've got spreading between the Pacific and Juan de Fuca plates. There's a transform. And then that Juan de Fuca plate subducts beneath North America, experiences flux melting, and the rising material has produced the Cascade volcanoes such as Mount St. Helens, Mount Rainier, and the ones we're going to talk about. These volcanoes, if you recall the different types, are composite volcanoes, sometimes called stratovolcanoes. Here's a picture showing all of the volcanoes that are in the Cascade Range. And this on the right is showing their eruption history in the past 4,000 years. So you can see that Mount St. Helens is here, and that one seems to be the real hothead. But down here in California, we have Medicine Lake Volcano, Mount Shasta, and Lassen Peak. And those we're going to look at next. But first, what kind of eruptions were these things capable of when they erupted? Well, the Mount St. Helens eruption shows us. Stratovolcanoes produce incredibly damaging eruptions with huge pyroclastic flows and ash and debris that is very hot, very fast, and wipes out much of what's around it. Stratovolcanoes are sometimes called composite volcanoes because they are a composite of two different kinds of eruptive products. We have lava, shown here in red as being active, and then in gray as being cooled from the past, interlayered with the pyroclastic material, or the tephra, that comes out of the volcano. So it's alternating layers, and that's what andesite volcanoes tend to do. So let's look at these California volcanoes real quickly. Medicine Lake Volcano is the northernmost one. The last eruption occurred 950 years ago, not millions of years ago, 950 years ago. And even though this is supposed to be an andesitic volcano, it's also erupted basalt to rhyolite in composition. We don't have time to go over why that might be. In the past 4,000 years, it's experienced 7 eruptions, and this is the most recent flow that you can see outlined here. And there in the distance is Mount Shasta, the second volcano we'll talk about. This eruption in the foreground was produced by the eruption of Glass Mountain, which is shown here. This is mostly obsidian. Next we get to Mount Shasta, which looks a lot more like what you think of as a volcano. It's got a peak and it's snow-covered. Now this one only erupted 200 to 300 years ago in its most recent eruption. This is an andesite, and it has also erupted 7 times in the past 4,000 years. Finally, we get to Lassen Peak, which is the southernmost of the 3. This one had an eruption about 100 years ago. The last eruption was a series of eruptions between 1914 and 1917. This volcano also has erupted from basalt compositionally to rhyolite. So we've looked at these 3 volcanoes, and remember they are subduction-related stratovolcanoes. Now we'll move on to Long Valley. We're done with composite volcanoes because Long Valley is not subduction-related. It has continental magmatism, which is rhyolitic, so we have rhyolite volcano, and a rhyolite dome is typically the product. Here is Long Valley caldera on the northern part of the Owens Valley. Here's Mount Whitney, if you're familiar with the Sierras, and if you drive up Owens Valley, you'll get to Lone Pine, then Big Pine, and then Bishop. And then if you keep going, you can get to Mammoth Mountains, and even all the way to Mono Lake. So on the left, I'm showing a blow up of this area here. Here's Mono Lake. And then it's not really obvious where the caldera is, the Long Valley caldera, but it's there. I've just surrounded it with a picture and some hash marks to indicate it's a depression. And then Bishop is down there. So magmatism started in this area about 4 million years ago when the Sierra Nevadas began to rise on their frontal normal faults. This separation and the faults allowed magma to get to the surface. But the really big eruption that formed the entire collapsed caldera occurred 760,000 years ago. And this is what it put out in terms of a rock type. It's called the Bishop Tuff. And this is showing the extent of the Long Valley ash. So this is not the material that formed the rock. This is the material that's much, much finer and was carried by the wind. And for comparison, you have the ash distribution circles of 2 Yellowstone eruptions. Remember, Yellowstone's out here. And then also Mount St. Helens eruption, that's the ash fall. And again, that's an andesite volcano, so it's much smaller. So here's the picture I showed you before on the left. And now on the right is a cartoon showing the different kinds of volcanic rocks that have come out of this area. So we have the Long Valley caldera, which again is here. And then we have the Bishop Tuff, which I've shown in yellow with arrows, and I've sort of outlined it over here so your eye can pick it up. And then notice that there are younger volcanoes as well, shown in orange and red, and I'm going to talk about these in just a moment. So here's the actual caldera, close-up of the caldera. And here's Mammoth Mountain, famous ski area. Here's Mammoth Lakes, nice vacation town. And here is what it might look like from the southwest to the northeast across this caldera. So we've got the collapsed structure, and then below it we have a partially molten magma chamber. We also have something called a resurgent dome, which is an uplift of material that's pushing the caldera valley floor upwards. And this resurgent dome, which you can see here in the topography, it's like hills, has risen about 450 meters compared to the rest of the valley floor, and it continues to rise today. So here's some of that other volcanism I was talking about. We have the Long Valley caldera here. On the right is a map. And then the Inyo craters, the Mono craters, and then some eruptions up in Mono Lake. And on the right we have, similar to the previous diagram, the age at which these eruptions occurred. So the Mono craters are the older group. They mostly started around 4,000 years ago. The most recent one is Panem Dome, which is also shown right here. And this is only about 700 years old. You can tell that this picture is taken from Mono Lake. There's the edge of the lake looking to the south. The Inyo craters are a bit younger. They're 600 years or younger. Here's a picture of them. And one of the very famous places you can visit is Obsidian Dome, which is only about 500 or less years old. And this is a huge, huge mountain of obsidian glass. Now, if you look at the caldera, it really doesn't look like a volcano, does it? Here's the resurgent dome, and there's the valley floor. We're going to stop the video right now, and I'm going to show you how the people of Mammoth were frightened into thinking that their town was about to undergo an incredibly explosive volcanic eruption.